I've just binged a long list of movies that were received either poorly or with mixed results. I didn't hate all of the movies on this list, though some of them were a real slog to get through. These are the movies that I found to be the most generic, boring, poorly made, or unintentionally funny of 2022. Spiderhead is directed by Joseph Kosinski, who directed Top Gun: Maverick, which was on my list for best films, though Spiderhead gets a dishonorable mention for my worst of the year. It's a science fiction story contained in a prison where a pharmaceutical company tests out different medications on the prisoners. The drugs have names like Laugh-A-Dill, because it makes you laugh a lot even if you're talking about a traumatic event, or Verbaloose, which makes you talk more, or Love-Actin, which is used to make the prisoners hook up while the creepy scientists watch. Then there's a drug called Darkenflox, which causes severe anxiety which can lead to self-harm. If you were to take a shot every time someone said Darkenflox in this movie, you'd pass out way before it was over. Chris Hemsworth plays a cheeky villain scientist named Steve. Steve is addicted to the same drugs he uses on the prisoners. Miles Teller is Jeff, a down-on-his-luck prisoner who's being experimented on. Steve uses Love-Actin on Jeff to make him fall for Heather, and then tries to get Jeff to give Heather Darkenflox in order to understand whether the effects of Love-Actin are long-lasting or not. Then there's Lizzie, whom Jeff shares genuine feelings for, so Steve makes Jeff choose who he's going to give the Darkenflox to. Jeff refuses to make a choice, and it goes on and on. Who gets the Darkenflox, Jeff? If you don't Darkenflox her, I will. I just Darkenfloxed your girl, Jeff. What are you gonna do about it? Darkenflox me in return? You can't Darkenflox a Darkenfloxer. Spiderhead gets a a 5 out of 10. The social commentary about pharmaceutical companies pushing dangerous drugs is on the nose and so stupid that it's kind of a fun watch, but I wouldn't call it a good movie. It seems to have a vague anti-vaccine subtext, but I might just be reading too much into the villain's third act monologue about how people should just trust the science.
Can't you picture it? A world filled with people who do as they're told.
The big reveal at the end is that all of the prisoners are secretly given a drug called OBDX, which makes them more obedient. Steve gets blown up in a helicopter crash after he gets too high on his own supply, and Jeff and Lizzie escape the prison together. A happy ending. Spiderhead was received poorly by critics and audiences, and it's a Netflix original, setting an early trend to this list as several of these movies were either made for Netflix or ended up there. This brings us to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022, the 9th Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. It goes the route of Halloween 2018 by bringing back the final girl from the original so she can finally sacrifice herself to Leatherface.
I'm the one who got away, and I'm here to make sure you don't.
The premise of the story is completely absurd. By the end of the film, I was thinking the comedy had to be intentional.
Try anything and you're canceled, bro.
A group of young hipsters show up to an abandoned ghost town trying to open up a comic book shop.
Oh, this space would be perfect for my art gallery.
Lila, look, we could put a comic book store in here or something cool.
They're actually trying to make it into some kind of commercial district, but the idea is so laughable that a bus filled with people just shows up in the middle of nowhere and says, "This would make a great place to open up an espresso bar." The final girl in the movie was also a survivor of a school shooting, but any attempt at social commentary fails because it's just so damn stupid. There's one guy in the town who's the stereotypical conservative Texan who loves his gun, and you think he's gonna end up joining with the hipsters, but he just gets killed off like every other character. Leatherface saws everybody into pieces. Limbs are flying everywhere. People are getting cut in half. If you're just looking for a lot of gore comedy, this one's not that bad at 83 minutes long. It even has that false ending where you think they're both gonna get away and Leatherface rises from the dead to decapitate one more victim through the window of the car. This is another film that I expected to be worse given the Rotten Tomatoes scores, but I'd give this one a 5 out of 10. It's not good, but it was more quick and painless than Death by Chainsaw. This is the second time Firestarter has been made into a movie. The first film came out in 1984 starring Drew Barrymore, and at least that one had George C. Scott in it. In Firestarter 2022, Zac Efron is a psychic father. He can make people obey him by first cracking his neck, but it makes his eyes bleed. His wife and daughter also have psychic powers. The daughter is the MacGuffin, the government is looking for her. The wife gets killed early on, and it's one of those sad dad road trip movies, but they only go to one location and then get caught, and lots of people end up with their heads going up in flames. Then it's over. The visual effects in this one look very cheap. There's a scene where the little girl accidentally sets a cat on fire. I was probably laughing too much at this scene. I know I'm supposed to take this seriously, but the effects look so bad. It's a setup for later when she sets someone on fire and has to put them out of their misery. There's also a scene where she says "liar, liar, pants on fire" before setting a woman ablaze. That's when you know this one's not a good movie, but it's also pretty short. It's not one of my favorite Stephen King stories to begin with. It's not really horror as much as it is science fiction. A killer with psychic powers coming after a family of mutants. It's pretty much Stephen King's X-Men. 5 out of 10.
Liar, liar, pants on fire.
The 355 is a spy thriller that failed to thrill me. This one was actually received well by audiences and poorly by critics. It's a feminist spy film like Charlie's Angels, but less fun. Or like Tenet, if there was no time travel element. The story is boilerplate. There's a MacGuffin device that can hack into any computer and start World War III, and every character is after it. It's a globe-trotting affair, so each character represents a different nationality or race. The women all join together in rebellion of their male-led agencies and chase the MacGuffin down together. It's a girls get it done film. Sebastian Stan is the lying, toxic male spy, and they all show up back at the end to poison him together. You have the obligatory scene where they chase someone down on a dock, and the scene where they tail someone through a crowded market. It all feels so tired because when the action does occur, it's not very creative. It's characters fighting in a storage room using a cardboard box to defend themselves from a knife. The auction house scene takes up a lot of screen time, and then the shootout finale in the high-rise is lackluster. The casting actually includes 2 Oscar winners, so it's not the performances that bring this one down. It's just such a middle-of-the-road action film, with its only noteworthy element being that it's all female leads. It's not only men that can shit out generic action movies, women can do that too, and that's a win for feminism. 355 is a 5 out of 10. Uncharted was another by-the-books, phoned-in video game adaptation, with Mark Wahlberg giving a lifeless performance. Tom Holland is serviceable as a young Nathan Drake. They make sure to show him with his shirt off as often as possible. Though he's a little too squeaky clean, because Nathan Drake is actually kind of a slimy scumbag of a character. He's murdered thousands of people just to obtain useless artifacts. The Uncharted games used the Indiana Jones films as inspiration, so bringing the franchise into film should feel more like an Indiana Jones or James Bond film. There's a standout action scene near the end with pirate ships being carried by helicopters, and even an earlier scene which mimics some of the game's platforming, though it mostly ends up being rather forgettable. Uncharted is another 5 out of 10. It didn't do anything for me either way. Black Adam was very boring for me. I know it was supposed to be cool when The Rock showed up and started killing a bunch of Special Forces military guys, but I'm pretty burnt out on all these similar superhero movies. The whole thing feels like an ego project for The Rock. There's a kid who's an audience stand-in who looks up to Black Adam because he's a cool, badass, tough guy who doesn't want to be a hero, but is one anyway. There's a post-credits setup for Superman, which is a joke because Henry Cavill won't even be playing Superman anymore. What a mess of a movie. Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, and Storm are all in this movie despite being Marvel characters. They're trying to stop Black Adam, but there's an even greater villain with horns. If I had never seen a comic book movie before, this might seem better, but given how saturated the genre is, this is just a 5 out of 10 for me. It's certainly one of the movies of 2022.
Just say Shazam, we all go home.
Thor: Love and Thunder might be my most divisive pick, but the Thor films are already some of my least favorite Marvel films to begin with. It's the second movie on this list to feature Chris Hemsworth. The unintentional humor of Spiderhead was funnier to me than this movie, which is intended to be a comedy. It's the kind of humor where a character says a silly thing that's probably not that funny to begin with, and then they say another thing that's even less funny, and instead of just cutting to the next scene, they say yet another unfunny thing. It's like they didn't know when to edit out a joke. Every stupid thing improvised on set made its way into the movie.
Really dragging this out.
Finish the classic Asgardian High One.
Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher was hyped up to be a big deal, but he's not in the film as much as he should be. Every time he was on screen, I found I was enjoying it a little more. I never felt there was much chemistry between Chris Hemsworth and Natalie Portman in the previous Thor films. It was a major flaw because so much emphasis was placed on this love story. Now she's back as Lady Thor, but she's also dying of cancer, and they intercut goofy scenes of kids with Thor powers fighting CG baddies with shots of Natalie Portman dying in a hospital bed. Obviously a lot was left on the cutting room floor. This movie is a total mess. Taika Waititi didn't even seem that interested in making it. He was making fun of the CG in his own movie. CG that was rushed to completion by overworked animators. We know this is just a paycheck movie to fund the next passion project, and Disney wanted it to be as kid-friendly as possible, but this whole movie feels phoned in. This one might appeal to kids because of the non-stop jokes, but I found it irritating. Christian Bale is the best part of the movie, the effects are hit or miss, and they really didn't do anything with the Guardians team-up concept. Thor: Love and Thunder gets a 4 out of 10. Like Black Adam, it's symbolic to me of everything I find tiring about superheroes, but even more annoying. Getting into my top 10, number 10 is Big Bug, a Netflix original French pandemic sci-fi cartoonish sex comedy, which is unsettling and incredibly unfunny. The characters are all annoying, and you're trapped with them. An AI is taken over and people are locked in their homes having sex with robots. There's not any deep exploration about the relationship that humanity has with technology. The whole joke is that everyone is really horny. That's about it. I gave this one a 3 out of 10 when I first reviewed it, and the score remains the same. The English dub might actually be considered a crime against humanity.
I'm not laughing.
Me neither. Turn it off, Leo. Why? Not retro glam enough for you?
Big Bug has the exact same disapproval average from audiences and critics, though the fact that it's from a filmmaker who has directed classic films makes it all worse.
Leo, we said turn it off.
Number 9, Good Morning. When I saw that Machine Gun Kelly had written, directed, and produced a stoner comedy starring him, Megan Fox, and Pete Davidson, I knew it would be absolutely terrible. And it was. It's billed as a comedy, but I'm not sure where the jokes were. An example of a joke from this film is where he opens up the glove box to a car and it's filled with gloves. Or the waitress at the restaurant brings them all mac and cheese, even though it's not what they ordered. Or there's a guy that looks like Drake and he has a snake.
Fake Drake.
Or one guy is on so much heroin that he almost drowns in his cereal. Simply smoking weed in a movie isn't subversive anymore. This is so far removed from Cheech and Chong or Half-Baked, it's a complete vanity project. Machine Gun Kelly plays London Clash, a television star who is trying to get a role to be the next Batman. Only, he's a complete idiot to the point of being brain dead. Yet, it's not a satire. All of his friends are morons, perpetuating the myth that all people that smoke pot are stupid. The actual plot is that his girlfriend sends him a misleading good morning text where she spells morning with a U. There's even a song in the movie where the lyrics talk about spelling good morning with a U. This causes London to believe she's breaking up with him, so he breaks into her house and accidentally destroys the vase with ashes of a dead family member in it. That old trope. Then he proceeds to get high for the rest of the movie. Tom Arnold and Dennis Rodman show up, I'm not sure why. There's even a post-credits scene where London goes over the plot of the movie and talks about how dumb it all is. The lampshading trope where the writers get ahead of criticism for flawed writing by having the characters address it. Then you can just say it's meta, and people will think it's smart.
This is the worst ending I've ever seen.
Machine Gun Kelly managed to put out one of the worst albums of the year, as well as one of the worst movies. They should have called this film Failing Upwards. How someone with so little talent could have so much influence confounds the mind. Overall, audiences seem to be more forgiving than me. I'd say 3 out of 10. At least it's only 90 minutes long, and one of the characters is based on me, so that's pretty cool.
Leo, you are the worst best friend I've ever had.
Number 8, Don't Worry Darling, is a movie about how men are toxic losers who spend all their time being brainwashed by the internet and want to enslave women. Harry Styles gives one of the worst performances of the year, and the execution of the social message is also poor. All this movie will do is push young men further into misogyny. I felt myself becoming more misogynistic with every passing frame of this dumpster fire. It's pretty well shot, but the 3 out of 10 I originally gave this film still stands. Number 7, Zero Contact. When I turned this movie on and saw it was all shot remotely during the pandemic, I didn't think it would even be able to function as a movie. Yes, this is a sci-fi horror movie, all set within a Zoom call. Every now and then we cut to security footage from different angles or footage from smartphones, but it's mostly just a Zoom call. Only a year after winning an Oscar, Anthony Hopkins ends up here, presumably shooting all his scenes from his home.
And later the internet and the cell phones led to the creation of the smartphone. And
the glitchy digital effects are overused and the acting is mediocre. It's all built around the death of a tech genius played by Hopkins. He has given codes to 5 of his most trusted friends, and there's a countdown element at play. The main dude is the son of the tech guy, who at first is trying to get them to not enter the code because he never trusted his father. After receiving a secret message from his father, he changes his mind and now he's trying to get everyone to enter the code. There's a killer stalking the 5 people, and in the end, the main character just goes, "Time travel. I can use time travel. I can use time travel to enter the codes of the dead characters."
Temporal displacement. It's time travel. I can go back.
So he just travels back in time and does that and saves the day. Zero Contact at least gets some points for resourcefulness, but it's another misguided pandemic film with questionable results. I'll give this one a 2 out of 10. It has an abysmal 0% audience score because no one watched this movie that wasn't getting paid to. Number 6, Jurassic World Dominion. A film so long that I thought the human race would go extinct before it was over. It was directed by Colin Trevorrow, who was originally supposed to direct what became The Rise of Skywalker, which I consider to be the absolute worst Star Wars movie. Jurassic World Dominion is the 6th Jurassic Park film. Never has the magic and wonder felt so absent. The CG isn't good. For some reason, Chris Pratt can stop any dinosaur just by putting up his hand. It's laughable. The old cast return, and they look ancient. Every time I look at Sam Neill's face, I feel my own mortality staring back at me. The film ends up not even being about dinosaurs. It's about a young girl who is the clone of a genius who can save the human race, but Tim Cook is the head of an evil company who have designed locusts that are eating all the crops. The cloned girl is the MacGuffin. She's the adopted daughter of the new leads, and the old leads are brought back to rescue her. Near the end, Dr. Alan Grant says something like, "It's a giga bullshit-saurus," and they all run away really slowly. I can't take any of this movie seriously. It's a globe-hopping MacGuffin chase that has very little of the horror element that made the original Jurassic Park so effective. I'm certainly not the first to use the franchise's own terminology against it by stating that this is one big pile of shit. A 2 out of 10. Number 5, The Bubble, is a straight-to-Netflix comedy making fun of the making of Jurassic Park Dominion, and it's actually somehow even worse than the movie it's doing a parody of. All of the jokes must be aimed at people that work in Hollywood because it's all humor based on how hard it was to make movies during the pandemic. The actors are all held prisoner by a producer who behaves like a dictator. This has to be the most unfunny movie Apatow has directed. His daughter shows up as a TikTok influencer, and there are multiple TikTok dance scenes which feel like they were written by an octogenarian. There are so many scenes of all the characters doing embarrassing dances. They even bring Beck out. It's what I would call peak cringe. It makes fun of the lackluster CG of the new Jurassic World and the emptiness of Hollywood sequels, but its characters are all insufferable. 2 hours and 6 minutes is really long for a comedy. I know it's making fun of a movie that's even longer, but does it also have to be a bloated failure? Neither critics or audiences were impressed with The Bubble, and like Jurassic World Dominion, it's also a 2 out of 10. Number 4, Moonfall is Roland Emmerich's most ridiculous movie to date. He specialized in disaster films his entire career, and in Moonfall, it turns out the moon was built by our alien ancestors as a way of protecting us from an AI that wiped them out.
Sonny, the moon is going to help us!
The moon is hurtling towards the Earth, and the heroes have to go inside and meet the alien in the form of a loved one, that old trope, in order to find out how to stop the evil AI. The premise is idiotic. There are scenes where the moon is scraping against the planet, and characters are just driving away from it. The CG isn't very impressive, the dialogue is awful, the characters are the same cardboard cutouts from every Roland Emmerich movie. Patrick Wilson is a really good actor who somehow ended up as the leading role in one of the most tired and generic attempts at a blockbuster movie. Audiences seem to like this as a turn-your-brain-off movie, but I don't watch movies in order to not be mentally engaged. If I wanted to turn my brain off, I could just stare at the wall for 2 hours. Number 3, Morbius, the most dreary and boring comic book movie of the year. Another L for Jared Leto after his offensively bad performance as Joker. This is a case where the memes are better than the movie. The memes were built upon quotes that weren't even in the movie. There is that one scene where Matt Smith dances, and it's kind of funny. This movie feels like the life has been sucked right out of it. Given that it's sort of a vampire movie, maybe this was a conscious decision. Morbius is kind of a pathetic movie. It hinges on a love story where there's no chemistry, and a bromance-turned rivalry where Matt Smith goes from being a nice guy to a Saturday morning cartoon villain at the drop of a hat. The CG looks like it's straight from the 90s. The big fight scene at the end is awful. How could you not laugh at this? Unfortunately, most of the movie is just a typical bad comic book movie. Morbius has a higher approval from audiences, which I don't understand because there's nothing here that stands out to me. I don't think the visuals were cool, and the action was not fast. He becomes a vampire at the half-hour mark, and the second act really drags. It's entirely predictable, and indicative of everything wrong with comic book movies. Morbius gets a 2 out of 10. Number 2, The Munsters. Why Rob Zombie decided to direct a comedy, I don't understand. I don't care if this was a love letter to his wife. Sherry Moon Zombie gives what is probably the worst performance of the year. If you find any of the jokes in this movie funny, you might want to get checked for brain damage. Or maybe someone spiking your water with Laugh-A-Dill. I don't even know what I was expecting from a Munsters film. Young Herman Munster here is not only buffoonish, but obnoxious.
Yowza, baby! Kick it! Woo!
The only performance I like is the Count. I find his position relatable, as his daughter is about to get married to an idiot. This movie looks extremely cheap, and the musical score sounds like it was royalty-free. It's the painfully unfunny jokes that put this film so far down on the list. There's a scene where they do a montage to I Got You, Babe. Rob Zombie probably should have just made an edgy, gory version of The Munsters because this Halloween store BS just isn't doing it. I'll give The Munsters a 1 out of 10. I would only recommend this to people who are die-hard Munsters fans, who have just been frothing at the mouth for more Munsters content for all these years. The number 1 spot is being shared by a pair of films in a trilogy. 365 Days This Day, and The Next 365 Days. Both films get a 1 out of 10. These are the sequel films to 2020's 365 Days, a softcore porn on Netflix which romanticizes violence against women and glorifies sex trafficking. A mafia boss kidnaps a woman and gives her 365 days to fall in love with him. And she does. But it's never played out to be a psychologically disturbing story. The audience is supposed to want them to fall in love. It's a disgusting, terrible movie. It has to be the absolute worst thing that came out of 2020. I can't think of anything worse. And no, it wasn't written by Andrew Tate. It was actually written by a woman. And no, that woman was not Ghislaine Maxwell. These films are all trash. They follow a similar flow. It goes excessive shopping montage, eating dinner montage, having fun at the club montage, sex montage, driving down a winding road in an expensive car montage, sex montage, riding on a jet ski montage, sex montage. In fact, these movies are told entirely in montage. It's like a series of music videos about how sexy it is to imprison women. There are scenes where instead of dialogue, a pop song starts playing and the characters mouth words to each other silently. Obviously, they were too lazy to write dialogue and just figured they'd let an overly polished pop song explain how the characters are feeling. In the sequel film, our aggressive alpha sex trafficker Massimo cheats on Laura, his victim bride, so she leaves him for the gardener named Nacho. So it's Twilight, but instead of choosing between a vampire and a werewolf, it's an Italian guy and a Spanish guy. It turns out Nacho is also a mobster and the son of Massimo's rival. Then it's revealed that Massimo has an evil twin, and Nacho and Massimo shoot the evil twin, but not before Laura gets shot herself. That's how 365 Days This Day ends. This is one of those films where every frame is fetishizing wealth. Massimo starts having orgies at the strip club and abusing cocaine, so Laura goes back to Nacho, but then ends up going back to Massimo, and then ends up going back to Nacho, and in the end, it's suggested she's going to stay with Massimo in a comical scene where they stare in silence at each other and the camera rotates around them, fading back and forth using the same footage. In the third movie, she fantasizes a threesome where her rival hunks, the aggressive one, Massimo, and the sensitive one, Nacho, make out with each other. I guess I have to end the video right now. It can't get any more fan fiction than this.